Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Carl Callender Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker, and I direct our creative writing program as well as our Visiting Writer Series here at Brookdale. I'm thrilled to have on our show today Patrick Roche, who is the author of the wonderful collection, A Socially Acceptable Breakdown, as well two previous chapbooks, the second one an award-winning one. Patrick had an off-Broadway show that debuted in 2022, also called A Socially Acceptable Breakdown, and it was featured in the Dixon Place's Hot Festival. He has over 9.5 million views on YouTube, making him one of their most popular spoken word poets. So welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I wonder just how you came to writing.
Well, I had started dabbling in it in my middle school days, high school days, just testing out a few things. I tried a little bit of poetry, tried writing a little bit of fiction, and never really pursued it too seriously or put too much time into it. And it wasn't until late in my college career that I really revisited it and rediscovered it, partially because I needed some sort of outlet and stress release and relief. I had used running for that in the past. I did cross country and track all through high school, and then I injured my knees and couldn't run anymore, and I lost that really important source of processing and allowing my mind to really reset and explore thoughts as well as just zone out. I didn't really have many avenues to pursue that would allow me that luxury, and I started to rediscover writing just as a necessity based on some difficult personal experiences and life happenings came about. And then one of my friends in college came by my dorm room, found that I had been writing and saw a paper on my desk, grabbed it, ran out of the room, and then came back a few minutes later and was like, okay, I looked up, there's open mics and things, and you need to, I'm going to sign you up for these, and we're going to go to them, and I'm not going to let you say no. And then I happened to cross paths at the second one of those, I think, with a new spoken word poetry group that had just started up on campus. And they invited me to come to a meeting, see what they were about. And I was thinking, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's really something I'm interested in. But I also was very antisocial and had no friends and was desperate for some sort of community and connection that I had struggled to find in my undergrad days. So I went and really just fell in love with a writing community. And that gave me the foundation to be able to explore my own writing more and feel comfortable doing that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, I came to writing because I hurt myself and couldn't do long distance running anymore.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I wonder, because you have done so incredibly well as a spoken word poet, you've competed, you performed everywhere, you've got 9.5 million, probably more now, since you updated your website views on YouTube. Do you consider yourself a performer or a writer, or is it they are so inextricably linked you can't even separate them?
Because my start in poetry, it wasn't necessarily coming from a performance background, maybe in theater as some spoken word artists.
So you have no theater background?
No. I did, a school play in third grade. But I also didn't really have much of a writing background either. They were very much linked from the start, I think, for me. They still sometimes are. I think in my mind, I still default to performer first, and I think that's because I had a lot of discomfort and a lot of uncertainty around my own ability as a writer on the page. And because of that, I used to think, maybe I'm more of a performer and I can put something on a page, but it'll not quite translate or not quite resonate with a reader. So that's still kind of a push and pull that I have.
Yeah.
And I think especially during pandemic, that was a time for me to sit back and sit down and really devote more time to writing, to seeing how a work can live and can really present not just on a stage but on a page as well. The same work maybe in those two different worlds, which are not necessarily that different, or playing around with some pieces that maybe explore structure and form in a way that I hadn't in my performance work.
past.
So I'm trying to bring myself somewhere more into the middle of performer and poet, but I think that pull and push and tug is still happening.
Is still there. Well, you have the 3 books, and the first one you self-published,
Yes.
correct? And the second one was an award-winning book from Bowery?
Yeah.
Poetry
So
Club? And now this full-length collection
Yeah.
from Button. I wonder, have you seen an evolution of yourself on the page across these?
I think so. The first collection, the first chapbook that I self-published, it felt like I had kind of fallen into the poetry world, and I was very grateful and fortunate that I was able to kind of hit the ground running. And I felt like I should have something with me. If I'm trying to make any sort of name for myself in this world, I should have something. So it was really thrown together, just of whatever I had.
Gotcha.
Then with the second chapbook, I actually got to work with an editor and a whole group of people to support that endeavor, and that helped a lot and gave me a lot more perspective and many more tools
Yeah.
to use during the editing process, during the writing process as well. And that was where I first started dipping my toes into exploring form, exploring some different structures. And now I think I've really taken the time to think about how to translate pieces that I love to perform to the page, and how to really place them in the context of a broader work, of a full collection. When I'm doing a reading or a show somewhere, I get to think of a whole set list of what I'm going to read. But often, I think in my background, it was in the slam spoken word competition world, where you're up on stage, you do one poem for 3 minutes or less. And I used to operate very much in isolation. This poem has to work and tell everything that it needs to, all self-contained. And that was an evolution in me as a writer, taking the time to think, how can these really work together? How can these pieces work together, inform one another, talk to each other, and create a really kind of dynamic journey rather than each having to be isolated?
And was this also the end result, in part, the Broadway show?
Yes.
You started to see the
Yes,
arc.
exactly.
Right. Which has some crossover with the new
Yes.
book.
So I was going back and forth of, do I want to create a kind of cohesive work that's a full-length collection? Do I want to really dive into performance more? And initially it was performance. And finding that there's a lot of overlap. There are themes that carry through a lot of my work. Most of my work, really all of my work, is rooted in personal narrative, my own personal experience. That naturally creates a through line. So I decided I wanted to see how these pieces could work together, as well as kind of exercise different muscles that I don't usually get to with monologues and acting, comedy, dance, multimedia things, video work. And I wanted to explore how poetry can work in something more, I don't know, a little bit more fully formed and thought out, that felt like it was pulling in all the different sides of me. But then that happened. The process of working all of that out came right at the beginning of COVID.
But there is a link on your website where someone can click and find
Yes,
it.
I was able to, right before COVID, the first, tryouts of this show in its infancy, we recorded.
You got it just in time.
Just in time. So, and then I spent a lot of time at home just editing it all together myself.
That's great.
And then I realized, okay, I have more time to kind of sit down and just devote to my writing and be more introspective and question what directions do I want to take my writing and my craft. And that kind of led to the book.
Yeah,
Really.
I looking at them, I see a big change from more the stage onto the page. You can see that. I guess our last question I want to ask before we take a break is, was there a poet who was working who you kind of leaned on to give you permission or to say, oh yeah, I like the path? Was there someone?
So it was actually as part of one of the teams that I was on, the last team that I was on for a National Poetry Slam, which is a team competition. And that was representing Bowery, which is also where that second chapbook was published through in partnership with a small independent press. And a few friends, one in particular is Ashley August, and she's now in LA, and she's also working as an actor. She's a fantastic poet, fantastic performer. She's been in lots of commercials and on some TV shows and things. And she really sat me down and she said, what do you want to do? What is your vision of where you would like to take poetry? Because it shouldn't be as boxed in. And we really had a fruitful conversation about what we as artists deserve and what we don't necessarily allow ourselves to explore because we feel limited by things that aren't necessarily actually there. And she was someone who said, I don't think we should be so limited to the page or even this slam spoken word scene. Poetry can inform a lot of different art and open ourselves up to that possibility.
Oh wow, that seems really important. I mean, there have been these silos, and there was some, like I think of Patricia Smith crossing over. I mean, she's had generations of people followed in that
very much
footstep as well. But just how imposed those silos are was part of the result of that conversation. All the possibilities that became, I'm going to say possible. That's terrible. For the Broadway show or the
very
off-Broadway
much,
show.
yes. It helped me think a little bit more fully and intentionally about, even when I do readings or performances anywhere, if I'm able to do a set with multiple pieces in it, it made me think more intentionally about that. And then I realized the stories and the threads that I'm introducing to connect these poems to each other, there is an actual broader arc and narrative here that I would like to explore more. And maybe I feel like I have permission to do that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Great. Well, we're going to take a break, but we will come back shortly. I'm talking with Patrick Roche, and please join us after the break.
Brookdale Community College, the power to provide accessibility to over 60 degree and certification classes on campus and online, to provide a rich community of faculty and student life, to provide affordability through financial aid, scholarships, and grants. Brookdale Community College, the power to provide you the access, affordability, and community to reach your education goals. Brookdale Community College.
Hi, and welcome back to the Dr. Carl Callender Brookdale Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker, and I'm here today talking with Patrick Roche, who is the author of A Socially Acceptable Breakdown, his newest collection of poems. So welcome back.
Thank you.
I wanted to just kind of ask you to read a poem, but before you did it, if you might maybe set us up a little bit by just talking about the book in general.
This book, as my first full-length collection, it is kind of the culmination of a lot of my writing and years of work leading up to now. And given that it pulls almost exclusively from personal narrative, from my experience, it's very personal to me. But when I started to, not necessarily remove myself from that, but when I started to consider it more in a complete picture, I realized I wanted to go on a journey of processing and exploring the ways in which I maybe avoided or escaped from experiences, difficult things, especially for me, mental health, queer identity, family, grief, substance use, body image, the ways that I maybe avoid those things, and then the ways in which I can confront them, process them, and then move forward to try to break down a lot of the stigma around those subjects, those experiences, those topics, because the stigma around those topics was a big factor in my own fears and my own feelings of shame, my own discomfort around them. And I try to use my work to pull from my personal experience in an attempt to move forward and dismantle some of that stigma.
Well, actually, before you read that, I was going to ask you about that. Do you feel, because you are tackling some really serious subjects, ones that, you know, historically have been stigmatized, people are shamed for, and is that something you intentionally have said, I need to speak, I need to be a voice?
Now, yes. Initially, no. It was writing about those experiences out of necessity, needing to articulate what I was going through and process what I was going through, or process things that had happened that I hadn't really faced. Then, after getting a lot of experience writing and sharing my work and learning that being honest, being open, being vulnerable, and direct about topics in maybe a way that is hopefully creative or hopefully innovative connects with people and makes topics a little bit less intimidating, a little bit more approachable, and a little more digestible, even for people who haven't experienced them, but also especially, hopefully, for people who have experienced similar things. Learning that there was that impact then made me feel more of an, not even necessarily an obligation, but felt like I had an ability to tackle some of these topics more intentionally, be more, take them on a little bit more strongly and directly to have this goal of
to give voice
giving
to
voice
things
to them.
that other people may not have the ability to do.
Yes, thank you.
And it's so important to have that voice that people can hear. Absolutely. Well, wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so I am going to read, I'm going to read one of the pieces that gets into my experience being a queer poet and queer person from just suburban New Jersey, and my own kind of internalized homophobia with that, as well as the difficulties I had with kind of making connections and grappling with my interpersonal relationships, as well as my family. So this is Suburbs in July, and it's inspired by a Rufus Wainwright song titled Zebulon. And I have a number of pieces that are in dialogue with works of music or pop culture. So this is one of those.
Great.
A Dunkin' Donuts is not the appropriate scene for an exhuming. Jacob is back from Baltimore, and I'm back from the latest funeral or reminder of one, and have ordered a hot chocolate in July because the last winter was as stubborn as I am, and neither of us is willing to surrender my bones fully to the other. But Jacob didn't come here to talk human anatomy or thermodynamics, just to catch up, even though I keep looking to his lips and remembering how he used to let me kiss him in high school when his parents were out, even though he was my straight friend. And I don't think he felt anything then, at least nothing that would qualify as a poem in the right light, only pity for this boy in his arms who would wander to the dugouts down by the fields if it meant the dusty embrace of another boy whose girlfriend didn't know any better, or did but didn't want to know. And Jacob was always the protective type, so maybe he figured this was a noble sacrifice of skin to keep his friend from the kind of shadow and sandpaper love that conservative working-class suburbia offers queer kids. But Jacob didn't come 200 miles to let me be a charity of sex this time. He just came to catch up and ask about Matt and Julia and my mother and my father and my grandparents and college and how my knees are doing ever since I busted them and can't run anymore. And I sketched the outline of his jaw into my mind since I won't see him for a few more years after we leave, and I say, everyone's fine. Or, they're the same. so the opposite of the first statement, or half of them are dead, and I've started to wonder how much money my family has donated to the tombstone makers' kids' college funds, because maybe that's a consolation, or we try to put flowers and grave blankets out at Christmas, and you'd think that would make the cemetery brighter, but somehow it makes everything look worse, or they said it snowed so much last winter it could cover fire hydrants, or I say nothing because nobody in this Dunkin' Donuts asked to see a whole row of graves upturned all out in the open and loud like that, and Jacob will be moving away and running half marathons in another city soon, and I'll have a boyfriend, and maybe nothing will stay dead in suburbia, or maybe everything always does, and Jacob says we should go get ice cream the next time he's in town, even though it will probably be winter.
So why did you choose that one? I mean, I know I said don't read something that takes 15 minutes,
I
but
know.
after that.
It felt like a piece that I don't perform super often. It was one of the pieces that I wrote when I was trying to be a little more page focused, but I still could not escape the strong feeling of wanting to tell stories.
Yeah.
And that's something that is very important to me in my writing, in my performance, and in the book as a whole, is using these stories that are experiences that I've had or experiences that I've grappled with or tried to process, and using those stories to illustrate broader themes, broader topics, or show these aspects of myself maybe that I've had difficulty with.
Yeah. I wonder, because I talk about this with my students. You know, we always teach our students in poetry, you know, the personal I in the poem is not the author. It's a created fiction for the sake of the poem, possibly a stand-in. What is your relationship then with that voice of the poems, and that it may be read as it often is, we say in error, as memoir?
Yeah. I maybe got off on either the wrong foot or a different foot with it, because I didn't think to say, oh, I'm distanced from this. And because everything was so directly related to personal stories and these details, you know, there might be names that are changed, but it felt it felt too obvious that it was my personal story. And then I just never stopped acknowledging that. And I found that the way that I liked to communicate with people and the way I liked to connect with people needed to be on a genuine, authentic level. So acknowledging that these were coming from my own life felt important to me.
Gotcha.
To say, yes, these are my experiences, and I am willing to share them, to speak about them, to give them space and voice, even if they might be difficult or things that I would have previously or would have expected to keep to myself or not allow into public. Or
Yeah, well, as you said, considering the themes and your, at this point, intention in part in going there, there does seem more power in owning, you know, these are not fictional voices. I wonder, and this is a nosy question.
No,
so
that's fine.
Is there some point where you're like, I've gone too far, or the poems where you're like, not ready,
So
that got pulled or something?
So I've dialed back some things or changed names, things like that. But the first poem that I really wrote that was being honest and open and vulnerable was also the poem that happened to get recognition.
Isn't that always the way?
Without me even expecting or realizing that that was a possibility. And it was about my family's experience with my father's substance use. And it was something that was very healing and cathartic for me as a writer to finally address something so openly and articulate my feelings and my experience and my history. And I was nervous about, but then got to a place where I was comfortable with performing it. And then suddenly there was a video recorded by Button Poetry, which their publishing arm is where this book is published through. and it was the resource that I had used to find a lot of the poets that I admired and a lot of the spoken word artists that I really looked up to. So when Button expressed interest in sharing it on their platform, I was really excited and I felt really honored. I didn't expect that it would go as widely circulated as it did, and then that was bizarre and made me feel like maybe I had crossed a line, because suddenly my secrets, but also my family's experience, which had been very closely guarded, was suddenly very public, even to family members, extended family, who didn't maybe even know about these experiences. So that made me feel very nervous and very uncomfortable and very worried about how my family would react. My family and my mother and my brother, they were very supportive and were like, no, this is the reality of what happened, and he's doing this and it seems to be very helpful for him, and we want him to pursue that. So I was very grateful for that and very lucky.
Oh, good. Yeah, yeah. Because you definitely are a storyteller, but I wonder, where does a specific poem begin for you? Is it in an image, a line, a idea? I want to write about this?
It has changed a little bit over time, or at different points in my life. Sometimes, especially in my early days as a writer, it was very immediate and very urgent. I need to react to, or I need to articulate or process something that just happened or that is really weighing on me. And then maybe I'll write those ideas down, those thoughts down, and find that there's some nugget in there of a line, of an image, of an approach. But then it became more, I would get usually an idea for an image, or there would be a topic. So sometimes there would be an image that would come to me and I would jot down that line and then I would return to it and flesh it out. Sometimes, though, it would be a topic. I haven't addressed this specific topic, or I think that I want to write something that is more intentionally addressing mental health in a more activist-y role. So let me do that. Or I want to write a poem in a certain voice or as a certain persona or character. Let me explore that. Usually it'll be either one specific image, or there will be a concept that I decide I really want to explore.
Gotcha. I guess last question, because we're kind of coming to a close, unfortunately. But do you find that, I guess as you're practicing your poems, as your voice, that when you get up on stage, in a way, you have this persona, this performance persona, that in a way is, I don't want to say a mask, but a protection in putting these poems out there?
Yeah. I try to keep something true to myself and honor the emotions or the experiences in the work without feeling like I'm actively being myself in those moments and reliving certain things. So I do feel that now I try to be aware of how I'm going to perform a piece so that I'm prepared and I can have a little bit of a step removed from it.
Gotcha.
So yes, it wasn't necessarily always the case, and that was nerve-wracking early on to feel like this is so personal and I just wrote this and it's me and I'm sharing
there
that.
with all of you staring
now
at me.
Feeling more confident in my reading, in my performing, I do feel an ability to be protected.
Well, you are an absolutely wonderful reader, and we're so excited for your reading tonight. Thank you so much for being here and for talking about A Socially Acceptable Breakdown, your new and wonderful book at Button Poetry, or at patrickroche.com, I think, correct?
PatrickRochePoetry.com.
Poetry, okay.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us today. And folks, thank you for watching as well. If you'd like to know more about Brookdale's creative writing program, we've got readings, a literary journal, and classes every semester that are open to the public. Don't have to be enrolled in a degree program to take one. Please just check us out at Brookdale's website. And thanks for watching, and thanks for being with us today.